He slammed into the pavement, the sharp sting of concrete biting into his ribs. Rain fell in torrents, drenching his back, running down his spine like icy needles. Every breath he took was a struggle, shallow, ragged, but steady. His hands, scarred and trembling, pressed against the wet stone steps of the riverside branch, the same steps he'd once walked up with pride. Above him, angry voices pierced the roar of the storm. "Get out! Don't ever come back!" another shouted, filled with disgust that stung more than the fall. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. He'd already seen it in their eyes. Judgment, dismissal. People passed by, skirts fluttering, umbrellas tilting, glancing for a heartbeat before turning away. To them, he was nothing but a threat, a criminal, a nobody. His soaked flannel shirt clung to his chest like a second skin. His cap lay beside him, forgotten in the mud, but there was something in his eyes. Not panic, not shame. Cold calculation, measured silence, a storm of its own. Slowly, he rose to his feet, rain cascading from the brim of the cap he picked up and replaced on his head. The massive glass doors of the bank slammed shut before him with mechanical indifference. Behind those walls, everything looked polished, secure. But 24 hours from now, nothing inside would be the same. He stood in the rain, unmoving. Each drop a drumbeat on his shoulders. Each second a step toward something no one saw coming. Jackson was 56th. Tall, worn, built like a man who'd spent his life working, not talking about it. His breathing stayed even, but his jaw was locked, tight with the pressure of betrayal. He lifted his eyes to the towering structure. The riverside branch. His family's legacy. Gold letters shimmered faintly against the gray drizzle. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. Behind those pristine windows were people who had once toasted to his leadership. Now they tossed him out like a stranger. For a long moment, he just stared. His hand, coarse and lined with age, reached toward the gleaming letters. He brushed his fingertips across the cold brass. It felt unfamiliar, like touching the shell of something long dead. This bank was supposed to be his monument, built with trust, not bricks, guarded by the promise of integrity passed from father to son. But now even the walls recoiled from him. He said nothing. Not yet, but his silence wasn't empty. It rang louder than a scream. In his mind, a voice echoed, calm, steady, deeply missed, his father's voice. "The moment you stop understanding your customers is the moment you start losing them." Jackson's eyes closed, and just for a second, he wasn't in the rain. He was back in a sunlit office, a younger man, listening. Not during some board meeting or seminar, but on a quiet morning filled with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. His father believed in stories, not statistics, in people, not projections. Jackson had forgotten that. Somewhere along the way, he'd let spreadsheets speak louder than handshakes. He had let convenience replace connection. And now, it had all come crashing down. Not in a boardroom, but on a cold sidewalk in front of the bank that bore his name. His clothes told the wrong story now. Worn jeans, threadbare flannel, mud-caked sneakers, and that same battered baseball cap he once wore in his father's garage. Back when he still believed the world could be fixed with the right wrench and the right intention. He didn't look like a millionaire. He looked like a man time forgot, a man who didn't belong in marble-floored lobbies. And that was the point. No one looked at him. No one saw him. And that's exactly what he wanted. Today, invisibility was armor. But even hidden beneath soaked layers and silence, a bitter truth gnawed at him. In his own institution, he hadn't needed a disguise to be treated like a stranger. This wasn't an accident. He had seen the signs, first like whispers, subtle shifts in the numbers, margins tightening with no cause, uncharacteristic complaints, loyal clients disappearing without a word. The numbers couldn't explain it, but his gut screamed something was wrong. His regional manager smiled too easily. His reports looked too clean. So Jackson stopped asking and started watching. Dressed as nobody, he returned to the place he once knew better than his own reflection. A place once built on excellence, now festering with secrets. He wanted to walk those halls, not as the CEO, but as a customer, vulnerable, unimportant, to see what others saw, to feel what they felt. But before he could utter a single word, he was thrown out like garbage in the rain. And now, standing in the storm, soaked through, Jackson understood something far more dangerous than the betrayal. Someone inside was hiding something, and someone else was working very hard to keep it hidden. When he first stepped inside the Riverside branch again, it felt like stepping into a replica of his past. All the details looked right, but the soul was missing. Years ago, these halls echoed with warmth. His father used to shake every hand, ask about grandkids, remember names. Back when trust wasn't demanded, it was earned. But now the air felt colder, hollow, like something rotten had been painted over with a fresh coat of deception. And Jackson, he was done being silent. This wasn't just about a bank. It was about a legacy, and someone had just tried to bury it. But they forgot one thing: he was still breathing. And he was still watching. The rhythmic tapping of keys echoed off the marble floor, sterile and detached. Conversations floated through the air, clipped and hollow, like echoes in a place that had forgotten its soul. Behind glass panels, employees stood still like mannequins, faces blank, gestures mechanical. Jackson moved through the lobby with a deliberate pace, his steps silent but heavy. No greetings, no smiles, no recognition. He wasn't a guest here. He wasn't even a man, just an interruption. This was his bank, built by his family, trusted to people who now moved like strangers under fluorescent lights. And yet, every step he took felt like trespassing. Jackson felt it in his bones. Something foreign, something cold, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. He was unwelcome in a place that once felt like home. From behind a glass wall, two tellers glanced his way. Their hushed voices weren't quiet enough. "Look at him, probably trying to cash a bad check, or overdrew again, you can tell." Their laughter was sharp, condescending, like broken glass. Just feet away, another employee near the corner shook her head with visible disdain. Why do people like that even bother? Total waste of time. Jackson stood in line and absorbed every word, not like a man ashamed, but like a storm brewing beneath the surface. They didn't bother lowering their voices, didn't care if he heard. Why would they? To them, he wasn't a man. He was a burden. But inside, Jackson was stone. He kept his gaze low, not to avoid shame, but to hold back the fire rising in his chest. Every whispered insult, every mocking glance, all of it happened inside a building that bore his family's legacy, and they didn't even know who he was. But someone noticed. At the far end of the lobby, behind a quiet window, an older woman stood. Her name tag read Ellen. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, hair pulled neatly back. Wrinkles lined her face, but they spoke of time spent in service, not age. Her gaze met Jackson's, calm, steady, not judgmental, not suspicious, just curious, concerned. She didn't whisper, didn't look away. She simply saw him. Jackson took note. Because in all his years in the business, one truth never changed. The best employees didn't need training to care. They didn't wait for policy. They simply showed up as human beings. Ellen's eyes held that truth. They locked eyes for just a second before a customer approached her window. She turned back to her task, but Jackson wouldn't forget her. Not today. Not ever. He stepped deeper into the lobby, trying to vanish into the background. Just another customer, just another shadow. But inside, he felt everything. Every breath carried tension. Every interaction stung like static. This place, the one his father had built on warmth and reputation, was unrecognizable. There were no handshakes now, no real smiles. Just forms, just transactions. When had the soul been stripped from it? He looked down at the paper slip in his hand. It was supposed to be simple. A withdrawal, nothing more. But everything in his gut told him this day would be anything but simple. Something inside this bank was broken, and someone had gone to great lengths to keep it that way. Why? That question sat heavy on his shoulders as his turn finally came. He stepped up to the counter. The teller didn't greet him. Her expression was blank, voice absent of warmth. Jackson slid his ID and slipped forward with calm precision. "I'd like to withdraw $50,000, he said, his voice measured, unshaken. The teller's eyes narrowed. She glanced at the slip, then his ID, then back at him. Her brow furrowed, not with recognition, but with suspicion. "50,000, she said, loud enough for others to hear. "In cash?" Jackson gave a single nod. "Yes, I arranged it earlier this week." But she didn't acknowledge his words. She picked up the phone, turned her body slightly away, and began whispering, all while keeping her eyes locked on him. Something had shifted. Another teller leaned over to listen. Their whispers grew sharper, more urgent. One glanced at his ID again, squinting. The other picked up his phone and, without warning or consent, snapped a picture of Jackson's documents. Jackson didn't flinch, but inside, his pulse quickened. "They say this account is too clean," one of them muttered. "Could be fake." "That's how they do it," the young teller replied. He heard everything. They weren't verifying a withdrawal. They were preparing for confrontation. They were painting him as a threat. But why? Upstairs, behind tinted office glass, Frank sat frozen at his desk. At first, the security footage meant nothing. Just another soaked stranger, another transaction, but then he leaned closer. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. His mouth went dry. It was him. Even under the weathered disguise, Frank recognized the jawline, the posture, the presence. Jackson. His blood ran cold. Frank snatched his phone. Speed dial. His voice cracked with panic. "He's here," he whispered. "Right now." A pause, then louder. "I don't know how, I just know he's here." He didn't break his stare from the screen. One thought pulsed in his mind like a warning siren. If Jackson completed that withdrawal, everything would unravel. Frank stood abruptly. His chair clattered backward into the wall. He locked his office door with trembling hands. Then more calls, faster this time. "Stop all transactions. Lock every terminal. Don't ask questions. Just do it." Another call. "Security stays alert. No risks. I don't care what's legal. We do not let this man walk out." Sweat dotted his brow. His breathing was erratic. His eyes never left the screen. Downstairs, Jackson stood calmly at the counter. Unaware, the ripple effect had begun. Tellers grew still. Movement slowed, smiles faded, conversations died mid-sentence. One whispered, "Something's off." Another nodded, eyes flitting toward Jackson. Manager said, "Freeze everything." Their nervous glances spread like wildfire. They didn't know who he was, but they knew something, or someone, was afraid. And fear doesn't lie. A young teller backed away from his station, pretending to adjust his drawer. But the truth was clear. He just wanted distance. Jackson didn't react. But he saw it, felt it. The fear wasn't about money. It wasn't about procedure. It was about him, and he still didn't know why. Behind him, a voice whispered from the waiting line, "Who is that guy?" Another leaned in, eyes wide, tone hushed. Whatever this was, it was no longer just a withdrawal. It was a reckoning. "I don't know who he is, but they're scared of him." The murmur passed quietly, almost swallowed by the still air, but not quietly enough. People started to notice. Not everyone, but enough. They noticed the sudden stillness behind the counters, the way whispers replaced routine, The way employees kept glancing at the same man but refused to meet his eyes. Anxiety began to ripple through the room. A woman clutched her purse tighter, inching closer to the wall. A man near the exit shifted his weight, eyes flicking toward the doors like he was calculating a way out. Someone asked quietly, "Did he threaten someone?" "No, he's just standing there." Jackson didn't move, but he heard every word, felt the weight of each stare. Not because he was dangerous, because he was unexplainable. A man without context, a question no one wanted to answer, and that made him terrifying. He stayed calm, voice steady, body still. But inside, Jackson wrestled with a single question, one that cut deeper than any insult. Why are they so afraid of me? The tension finally broke. A teller, voice too loud to be accidental, called out sharply, "Call security!" Now, every sound in the lobby vanished. A silence descended like fog. Chairs creaked. Paper stopped rustling. All eyes turned to him, the soaked man in the worn clothes, now painted as a threat. Jackson looked up, slowly, deliberately. His eyes were steady. His voice came quiet, but it carried. "Why?" No answer. "I've given valid identification," he continued, louder now, clearer. "I requested a withdrawal. Why are you calling security?" Still, no one responded. The teller's hands shook as she avoided his gaze. Another reached for the phone, paused, then dialed. Not a word to Jackson, not a question, just action, as if he were a bomb about to go off. Jackson turned his head. The silence grew heavier. Customers stared with a mix of curiosity and unease. No one stepped forward. No one intervened. This wasn't refusal. This was containment. And Jackson knew. This wasn't fear of him. It was fear of what he might expose. Then came the footsteps, heavy, controlled. Two security guards, broad-shouldered, expressionless, moved through the lobby with military precision. They didn't look at the tellers. They didn't ask questions. They came straight for him. "Sir," the older one said flatly, "we need you to step outside." Jackson's voice didn't waver. "Why?" The younger guard's response was just as hollow. "We've been instructed to remove you." Jackson looked between their faces, stone, impenetrable. "I'm a customer," he said firmly. "You haven't even processed my request. Please step outside, sir." No fury, no clarity, just removal. Behind the counters, the staff stood motionless. Customers whispered again, now emboldened by the scene. Finally. What a waste of time. People like that always cause problems. A teller laughed, soft and cruel. "Deserves it." Jackson heard every word. He didn't flinch, not even as they took him by the arms. He dragged his feet slightly as they escorted him toward the exit, and as the doors opened, cold wind met his face. He had been ejected, from his own creation. The doors slammed shut behind him. For the first time in his life, Jackson stood truly outside. Outside the system he helped build. Outside the reputation he spent decades earning. Rain poured down, soaking his shirt to his skin. His breath remained steady, but his eyes, now, were sharp. He reached slowly into his back pocket, pulled out his phone. Despite the rain, his fingers didn't tremble. He dialed the one number that mattered. "This is Jackson," he said, voice cold as steel. A pause, then, "Start the investigation." Another pause. "I don't care who's involved. I want a full audit, Riverside branch, every record, every transaction, every employee." He raised his eyes to the windows of the bank. They tried to bury something. Silence stretched. Not anymore. Then, 4 final words. "Do it right now." And with that, the countdown began. 24 hours later, the rain had stopped. The morning was dry and bitter. 3 black cars pulled up outside the Riverside branch. Doors opened with quiet precision. Suits stepped out, lawyers, auditors, federal agents, and Jackson. No flannel shirt, no disguise, just a dark coat. Eyes focused, voice unreadable. He said nothing. The team followed him with purpose. Inside, the bank hummed with artificial calm. Employees smiled for customers. Transactions resumed. Business as usual, until Jackson stopped one step before the doors. He looked at his reflection in the glass. Then quietly, "Go in." The lead lawyer nodded. The agents adjusted their jackets. Papers in hand, badges exposed, they entered. Jackson didn't follow. Not yet. From inside his upstairs office, Frank looked up. At first, confusion, then realization, and then panic. He saw them, the agents, the lawyers, the man he tried to erase. Jackson. His breath caught. His phone dropped from his hand, clattering across the floor. No, not today. He spun, knocking over a chair. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He grabbed files, shoved them into a bag, fumbled for his jacket. Run. His steps thundered down the hallway, past staff who stared without knowing why. "Where's he going?" someone asked. No answer. Frank shoved the emergency exit, locked. He turned, frantic, eyes wild. No way out. "Stop!" The voice came sharp. 2 federal agents approached, calm, methodical. Frank raised his hands halfway, sweat streaking down his face. "I didn't do anything," he gasped. Silence. An agent gripped his shoulder. Final, absolute. "You're done," he said. Frank staggered. "Please, I can explain." But no one was listening. In seconds, the cuffs clicked shut. The manager who once controlled everything now stood trapped in the web he spun. He didn't need to look up. He heard the footsteps, measured, unforgiving. Then Jackson's voice, low, ice cold. "Hello, Frank?" Frank couldn't breathe. Jackson stepped closer. "Yesterday, you refused to process my transaction." Silence. "You locked your door." Silence. "You ran." Frank finally whispered, "I didn't know." Jackson's voice was a blade. "Yes, you did." He leaned in. "You threw me out of my own bank." A beat. "Now watch what I throw you out of." He stepped back, his voice rising just enough to be heard across the lobby. "Frank has been stealing from the dead." Gasps rippled through the room. Jackson continued. Steady, unforgiving. For 18 months. Accounts belonging to deceased customers were quietly left open. Their money moved, siphoned, hidden, silent theft, carefully executed. He paused. Frank managed it all, using this staff, this system, your trust. Then Jackson turned to Ellen. His voice softened, but the weight was unbearable. "And your husband, Ellen?" She froze. Robert Chen's account was one of them. Her knees buckled. Her voice broke, fragile as glass. "He used Robert?" Jackson didn't blink. "He used Robert's name to steal over $2 million. Ellen collapsed inward. A sob caught in her throat. Hands covered her face, but the tears came anyway. She whispered, "He used Robert's name." And in that moment, a bank full of strangers realized the truth. This wasn't just about fraud. It was about betrayal, legacy, and what happens when a man fights to take back what's his. Each word landed like a hammer on Ellen's chest. Her husband, her Robert, gone just 6 months, and yet even in death, he wasn't left in peace. Her eyes, now brimming with disbelief and raw betrayal, lifted toward Jackson. She struggled to process what she had just heard. He took his name, like it was nothing. She whispered it, not to Jackson, not to the agents, but to herself. Like her soul couldn't make sense of how something so sacred could be treated with such cruelty. Jackson stood beside her in silence, not because he lacked words, but because nothing he could say would soothe what had just been broken. Frank hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen memory. He had stolen dignity. And for a moment, the air inside the branch became heavier, as if the grief Ellen carried had reached every corner of the room. Employees who once dismissed her now couldn't look her in the eye. Customers, frozen mid-transaction, felt the ache of her silence. It spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Frank snapped. I didn't mean, I didn't know. I didn't want. His words collided, clumsy and desperate. His breath came in ragged gasps. The cuffs bit into his wrists as he struggled against the inevitable. His eyes darted between faces, searching for sympathy, for rescue. He found none. I had no choice, he said, almost choking on it. The system, the pressure, But the excuses died in the stale air. No one answered him, because no one believed him. The agents flanked him now, their grips tighter, their expressions unreadable. And in Frank's eyes, something changed. The panic dimmed, replaced by something more hollow. Defeat. Because deep down, Frank Hawthorne knew. He wasn't explaining, he was begging. And Jackson? He remained motionless. The agent spoke with quiet finality. Frank Hawthorne, you are under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Frank didn't resist. His body sagged, knees buckling. His strength, like his lies, abandoned him. The agents hauled him to his feet. No applause followed. Only silence. Ellen stood still, her grief no longer sharp, but heavy, a sorrow that aged the room. Jackson folded his arms, expression unreadable. Not angry, not triumphant, just tired. Justice hadn't arrived. Not yet. This was only the beginning. As Frank was dragged away, their eyes never met. There was nothing left between them. Frank had already lost everything, and Jackson had no reason to look back. Days passed. The bank, once buzzing with whispers and judgment, was quiet. The noise was gone. Only honesty remained. Ellen stood at the center of the lobby, alone. Jackson approached, holding a single sheet of paper. "This is yours now," he said softly. She hesitated, hands trembling as she reached for it. She read the words slowly, as if they might vanish. Director of Customer Protection, a title she'd never imagined, a responsibility she hadn't asked for. "I'm not qualified," Ellen whispered, her voice thin with doubt. Jackson shook his head once, firm but kind. "You are, because you care, and that's what this bank forgot." They stood together in a silence that felt earned, not awkward, but full. Ellen blinked back tears, pressing the paper to her chest. Her voice wavered. "I'll do my best." Jackson's reply came without hesitation. "I know." And that's when the real work began. Near the entrance, where the marble met the morning light, a new wall had been built. Simple, wooden, polished to a quiet shine. Names were carved into its surface. Dozens. Each name belonged to someone who once trusted this bank with their legacy. Customers long gone, but no longer forgotten. Above the names, a single line. "In memory of those who trusted us." People stopped there. Some touched the wood gently. Others simply stood in silence. It wasn't decoration. It was a promise. Employees paused there each morning, a reminder that trust had weight, that names mattered. Jackson never touched the wall. He didn't need to. It spoke for him. Every month, the bank now sent letters. Not emails, not mass-printed messages, real letters. Written by hand, carried by care. Each one said the same thing in different words. "Thank you for trusting us. Your loved one's name is part of our history now. Because of them, we will serve better." Ellen oversaw every envelope. Her hands guided the process. Her voice ensured sincerity. The same employees who once whispered behind glass now sat quietly after hours, pen in hand, heart open. Some cried, some paused mid-sentence, overcome by the weight of what they'd ignored. But they wrote, and trust began to mend. At the counters, something shifted. "Good morning, sir. How can I help?" "Take your time, ma'am. No rush. Small things, but real." The tone was no longer rehearsed. It was genuine. One teller leaned over to help an elderly man sort his bills. Another explained a form slowly to a confused young couple. There were no eye rolls now. Only patience. In quiet corners, where once suspicion lived, compassion took root. Not because of new training, Not because of scripts, but because of understanding. One conversation at a time. Anything else I can help with? No. Well, thank you for coming. Each farewell now held meaning, because Ellen's message had settled into every corner, treat every customer like family. And they did, one by one. Jackson returned one morning, same flannel, same worn shoes, same cap. But this time, the lobby didn't freeze. Jennifer, the teller who once dismissed him, smiled warmly. "Mr. Jackson," she said with genuine care, "here for another surprise visit?" Another waved from across the counter. "Welcome back, sir." Jackson gave a small nod. No words, but inside something shifted. No stares, no whispers, no fear. He was no longer invisible. He was family. The space felt brighter now, not because of the lights, but because of the people. For the first time in months, Jackson allowed a rare thought. Maybe this place was home again. Ellen approached, her steps sure now. She smiled softly. "Mr. Jackson?" He waited. "I still think about Robert," she said, her voice quiet but strong. Jackson listened, not with pity, with presence. Ellen touched her badge, not as decoration, but as a purpose. "He'd be proud of what you've done here." Then softer, "And I hope he'd be proud of me." Jackson replied without pause. He would. Her eyes shimmered, but the smile held. In the center of the lobby, Jackson stood for a long while, watching. An elderly man, counting his change slowly. A young mother opening an account for her child. A teenager asking nervous questions. No one rushed them. No one dismissed them. And in that quiet moment, Jackson remembered his father's voice, no longer as a warning, but as a promise fulfilled. Every customer is family, not just numbers. People. Jackson let the thought settle. Because trust, he now knew, wasn't a line in a mission statement. It was earned, one moment at a time. This wasn't just a bank anymore. It was something stronger. Because real change doesn't come from rule books. It comes from reflection, from reckoning, from choices made in silence. Jackson looked around once more. No announcement, no speech, just understanding. Because rules protect money, but trust protects people. And that was the business his family had truly built. And finally, it was open again.